Hello everyone, Katerina here. Welcome to my YouTube channel and blog. I'm continuing with my Fun Masculine Cat series. If you want to know what I mean with fun masculine cats, I explained it in my first video in this series, where I also mentioned that my cats most of the time consist of some kind of a background and a stamped image or a sentiment. And instead of making just one cat, I thought why not to make few of them, especially because Father's Day is coming up and you might need few more ideas. So this might be a longer video, but I left timestamps in the description if you want to skip it through. I'm going to be using multiple items to create different backgrounds. I have here stencils, background stamps, watercolors, distress inks, embossing paste. And the stamp set I'm using here is this polar bear stamp set from MFT, but you can use whatever stamp set you have. This video is more about the backgrounds. I wanted to use every single bear in the stamp set simply because I think they are all cute. Each of the bears I stamped at least once. The small bear I stamped multiple times. And for the stamping, I used the VersaFine ink in Onyx Black and Bristol cardstock. Then I colored all the images. I will show you quickly the coloring of one of the bears. I didn't do anything special here. I used the Faber-Castell Polychromos. With 2 shades of grey, I colored the outlines of the bear, and I also added the grey to the parts where I thought the shadow would be. Then I took 2 shades of colored pencil, in this case blue, and I colored the scarf. When it comes to coloring, I don't do anything complicated. I mainly try to add a little bit of depth to the character. To finish it up, I also added 2 rosy cheeks, and that was it for the coloring. And when I was done with the coloring, I took my scissors and cut out all the bears. I also stamped the sentiments. I used 2 sentiment stamps from that stamp set, and I stamped them on a black cardstock using VersaFine ink. And then I heat embossed them with a white embossing powder. And later I created banners out of them. Before we get into making those cards, let me show you 2 examples that I made based on my cards from my 2 previous videos. First is the one that I made with a guinea pig with a wreath. The stamp set with the bear does not really have any tiny stamp sets, so I could not create a wreath. It would have been fun if the stamp set had a stamp with a small fish, but at least I was able to recreate the background. And the second card, which is based on the card with a galaxy and the octopus, I just had a spare galaxy background and I adhered the bear and the sentiment. So you can see you can use any card design with the different stamps and do some small changes if necessary that will fit your stamps and create a unique card. And I'm not talking about you should not be copying people, I'm more talking about when you don't have a particular product, mainly stamps, you can still create something similar with different supplies. But now let's get into making some fun backgrounds. Starting with creating a background by using the stamps from the stamp set, I decided to use the smallest bear and I stamped it multiple times covering the whole cardstock. I used here an acrylic block. I just find it easier and quicker when I'm creating a background with single stamps. I colored all the bears the same way as I showed you in the example. And since this is a quite bold background, I decided to add only a sentiment. And I decided to finally use my alphabet die set from Altenew. I had few letters pre-die cut. I used them to create the word happy, and the word birthday I heat embossed on a black cardstock. The letters I pre-die cut from a white cardstock, and as you see, you would hardly see it if I left it white, maybe if I added a bottom layer in black, but I don't have a die cutting machine at the moment, so this was not an option for me. The best option in this case was to use a black alcohol marker. I colored all the letters. It was a little bit messy, but it was the easiest way to color the letters. And once I was done, I let it dry. Then I assembled all the letters on the stamped panel using my ruler. I wanted to make sure that the sentiment is centered. And then, trying not to move the ruler, I used a liquid glue to adhere them onto the panel. What you could also do is to add multiple layers of the die-cut letters to create a dimension, which always looks good. After I adhered all the letters, I attached the banner with the word birthday, which I adhered using a double-sided foam tape. First, I thought I will adhere it on the right side, but it was covering the head of the bear, so I adhered it on the left side. And the first background is done. Moving on to the background number 2. Again, here I didn't do anything complicated. I used watercolors to create a simple stripy background using 3 shades of blue, which is not really necessary. You can use only 1 shade. And I used 2 brushes to create thick and thin lines. For the thick lines, I used an angled brush just to try it out. Otherwise, I would have used a flat brush. But you can use a round brush as well. and I was swapping the brushes and the colors as I was moving down. Once it was dry, I adhered the sentiment that I cut into a banner using a double-sided foam tape. And I also adhered the bear, which I think is the most fun bear out of all of them, just skating across the panel. And the card number 2 is done. Moving on to the card number 3. Here I'm using a background stamp, distress inks, and I'm going also to heat emboss using a white embossing powder. And I'm also going to be stamping directly onto the card base. I'm using here the Tim Holtz stamping tool, but it did not make the stamping easier. I had to restamp and restamp. The middle part of the stamp just would not stamp properly. I even put a napkin under the cardstock to make it softer, but it did not make any difference. But after restamping hundreds of times, I finally got an impression. Then I sprinkled the white embossing powder all over it and I heat embossed it with my heat gun. It is really hard to see it since it's white on white, but I will be adding some color and then you will see it. I'm using Distress Inks Mermaid Lagoon and Tumbled Glass. I applied the darker shade at the top and the lighter at the bottom. Of course, with all these cards, the color choice is up to you. I kept it bluish, not because I'm making masculine cards, but because I like the blue watercolor stripes and I wanted to keep the colors cohesive. Also, to apply the inks, I'm using this cheap makeup applicator. You can also buy these applicators from crafting manufacturers, but I got mine in something like Euro or dollar store. I let the piece dry and then I adhere the stamped bear and the sentiment. I think this particular stamp would be great for Father's Day or Mother's Day when you have a baby and you give it to the parent on behalf of the child. What do you think? I think that's a good idea. But that's it for the card number 3. And for the card number 4, I'm using a stencil with dots. And what I wanted to try is to apply one color, move the stencil, apply the next color, and so on. Again, I'm using here Distress Inks, various shades of gray, weathered wood, iced spruce, hickory smoke, and black soot. I'm applying the Distress Ink directly onto the card base. This is actually why I'm using this applicator, as it worked the best with the cardstock of the card base. But you can use a separate cardstock and the applicator of your choice, and then adhere the piece on top of the card base. Also, underneath the card base, I'm using a laminated cardstock. I find it easier to apply Distress Inks when I use a slick surface underneath the panel. Again, to finish up the card, I adhered one of the bears and the sentiment using a double-sided foam tape. By the way, if you think the dots look a little bit distorted, in real life the dots look much clearer and are easier on the eyes. So that's it for the card number 4, and let's move on to card number 5. For my 5th card, I'm going to use an embossing paste. This one is from All Too New. I already used it on the card with the guinea pig, but this time I will be adding color using Distress Inks. I squeezed 2 Distress Ink colors onto a laminated cardstock. The distress colors I'm using here are Lucky Clover and Blueprint Sketch. And using a palette knife, I scooped up a little bit of the paste. You don't really need much, and I mixed it with the inks. Since the paste is white, the colors are quite light. If you would like to have more vibrant colors, you will need to add more color. For this, probably re-inkers might be a better option, or you could try using a translucent embossing paste. Again, I applied the paste directly onto the card base, and I used a post-it tape to cover the back of the card base, just not to get any paste on it and mess it up. And using my palette knife, I applied the paste across the stencil, switching between the green and blue. Once I was happy with the application, I removed the stencil and I let it dry. On the jar, it says it takes 1 to 2 hours. I think mine took about an hour. I would say that the texture paste from Tim Holtz dries much quicker. And also, I didn't want 100% smooth, even look. That's why on the left and right, the hearts are only partial. After the piece was dry, I adhered the bear and the sentiment, and the card is done. For my last card, which is technically a bonus card, I was inspired by one card I saw on the internet where the person used stamped cacti, and I thought it was a great idea. I could do something similar like that with the bears. I'm making a long card or a slimline card or whatever is that called. First, I created a background and I applied Distress Inks all over the panel. I started with a Blueprint Sketch at the top, and at the bottom I used the shaded lilac. And the cardstock I'm using here is the Canson Excel watercolor. I really like to use it with distress inks because it's quite smooth, so the application is very easy. After I applied the inks, I adhered a double-sided tape on the back of the panel, and on the back of the bears and the sentiment, I attached a foam tape. The sentiment I picked from another stamp set. I needed a more neutral sentiment because this is going to be a name day card for my dad. I'm from Slovakia and we celebrate the name days. My one, for example, is in November. I adhered all the pieces on top of the panel, starting with the big bear and the sentiment to make sure it's centered. And on each side of the big bear, I adhered 2 small bears. And I used a ruler, making sure they are adhered on the same level. To embellish the card a bit, I used the Nuvo drops in clear and in silver. And I first squeezed it out on a piece of scrap paper just to make sure it works. And also I used it later to see if the drops are dry and solid. This way I did not ruin the drops that were on the card. I applied the drops across the panel, somewhere in threes, some I placed randomly. And then I let it dry. So all the cards are finished. Here you can see them all together. If you would like to see them individually, just hop over to my blog. The link is in the description below. If you enjoyed this video, don't forget to give it a thumbs up and subscribe if you haven't done so already. I would really appreciate it. If you haven't seen my 2 previous videos with fun masculine cats, one with octopus, one with a guinea pig, make sure you check them out. They should be showing on your screens now, and I also link them in the description below. Thank you all so much for watching, and I will see you in my next video.